Good evening and welcome to this Friends at Home event sponsored by the Friends of the Alameda Free Library. Tonight, we are honored to be joined by Chris Baty, local Alameda Library patron, founder of National Novel Writing Month, known as NaNoWriMo, and he's author of No Plot, No Problem, a low-stress, high-velocity guide to writing a novel in 30 days, and he's co-author of Ready, Set, Novel. I am T.C. Curry from the Friends of the Alameda Library, a nonprofit organization raising funds and advocating for our outstanding public library in this beautiful city of Alameda, California. These events are free, but you will not be surprised to learn that we appreciate donations. A little later, you'll see a link for donations in the chat thread. And we appreciate any donation, large or small, to support these virtual events, as well as many real-life programs conducted within the library. Before we get started, you should know that this is a live webinar, and it's being recorded and will be posted later on YouTube. So your microphone and cameras are turned off. And please use the chat. You can introduce yourself, let us know where you are zooming in from, and to ask questions. We are going to try to get to all of your questions towards the end of the program. This chat is being monitored, so please be respectful. So, enough about the mechanics. Let's move on. Chris Baty accidentally founded National Novel Writing Month in 1999 and oversaw the event's growth from 21 friends to more than 300,000 writers in 90 countries. Chris stepped down from leading NaNoWriMo in 2013 and now serves as board member emeritus. He oversees the user design writing team at Figma. His quest for the perfect cup of coffee is never ending and will likely kill him someday. But in the meantime, he's here with us. Oh, and please stay tuned until the end of the program to find out how you can participate in NaNoWriMo here at the Alameda Free Library this November. So please join me in welcoming Chris Baty to our program. Chris, thanks so much for joining us.
TC, it's so cool to be here. Okay, wait, before we start, I just need to talk about the Alameda Free Library for just a second and the Friends of the Alameda Free Library. So we moved here in 2020. We had been living in Oakland, and there's no place like more special than the various library branches in Alameda. My son, wife, and I are there every week. We are eyeballing that Lucky Day shelf. We are checking out board games. We are perusing the graphic novel section. There really is it's such a joyful place to be. I just want to thank you and the organization for keeping it going and encourage everybody to please donate to keep that bookish magic alive.
Thank you. So to start us off, can you read a little bit from your book's introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. So TC, I was telling you that this is like the first time that I've actually, I think, read from this book. I feel like I've done a lot of these events that I'm usually focused on like task mastering and browbeating and trying to get people to write their own novels and create their own words. So it's the first time I actually read mine. So I'm going to clear this throat here. Okay, this is from the introduction. And it's describing that kind of the origin story of National Novel Writing Month. That love of books, I think, was the saving grace of the whole enterprise. However unseriously we had agreed to take the writing process, we had an absolute reverence for novels themselves, the papery bricks of goodness that once pried apart unleashed the most amazing visions in their owners. In books, we'd found magical portals and steadfast companions, witnessed acts of true love and gaped at absolute evil. Books, as much as our friends and parents, had been our early educators, allowing us our first glimpses into life beyond the gates of childhood. If we loved books, we were equally awestruck by their creators. Novelists were clearly a different branch of Homo sapiens, an enlightened subspecies endowed with an overdeveloped understanding of the human condition and the supernatural ability to spell words properly.
Yeah, thank God for spell check. I was fascinated by reading the introduction to this book and how it all came about. I myself participated in 2014, And so it was really fun to go back to the origins because I'd been hearing about it, since 1999. So can you tell us a little bit about how it got its start and what the goal was?
Yeah, I mean, it had the most inauspicious origins. Really, like the bar was set incredibly low. So I was 26 at the time. I was living in Oakland. And this was in 1999. And so the Bay Area was going through this big internet boom. It was the very first one. And it seemed like anything was possible, right? It was sort of like suddenly things that seemed to have no value were priceless, and everybody was becoming a millionaire left and right. And it just felt like opportunities were falling from the sky. And somehow in the middle of that, I was working at like the most unglamorous job where I was working as an editor at a website for business travelers, focusing on Houston, Texas, which nothing against Houston, Texas, but like spending my day editing like listings for florists and the best place to have like a power breakfast in Houston if you're a business traveler. Like as a 26-year-old living in the Bay Area, I was just like, this is not the future I had imagined for myself. And I think I really believe that quarter life crises are real. Like I think there's such a thing as a quarter life crisis. I think the 20s are a really tough time because you look around you and you see it feels like everybody's doing more and moving themselves into the right places and having these amazing relationships. And I think I was just like, I feel stuck and I want to be unstuck and I want to do something ambitious and big and bold. And I think to me, the idea of like writing a book, as I'd read in No Plot, No Problem, growing up, books were really like my siblings. They were my companions. I loved books. And I was like, what if I could write a book? And then my next thought was like, I don't know how to write a book. So I didn't have any like insights on how to write books, but I had something better, which was I had a group of friends who had trouble saying no to terrible ideas. And so I pitched this idea to this group of friends where I was like, okay, here's the deal. This was, I think, when I first came up with this was like in May of 1999. I was like, in July, I'm going to declare July National Novel Writing Month. And we're all going to write these terrible books in a month, but we're going to kind of do it together. And I think that ended up being kind of the saving grace of all of it, was this idea of like turning what I think typically have been seen as this very solitary activity, right? I think when we think about novel writing, we think you have to have like a garret, or there needs to be a tower, and you go into your garret or tower and you spend decades there and you emerge, transformed and sooty, and you have this masterwork. But I think our approach was pretty different, which is like, we came up with this absurd deadline, which I think helped all of us lower our expectations for what we were going to produce. Like it was never going to be good because nobody can write a good book in a month. And the other piece was just that we were going to try to keep each other company through it. And so we started doing this thing that in 1999 was a little bit rare, which is we would take our laptops and go out in public. And like laptops were like the size of like dryers. Like it was like a washing machine size machine in 1999. And they had a battery life of about 6 minutes. And so we brought extension cords and we would go to places like Cafe Strata in Berkeley, like a beautiful cafe, and we would just ride together. And we kind of also started breaking this endeavor, which again feels like this very rarefied, hard to quantify creative undertaking. And we started really quantifying where we were like, okay, we're going to be here for an hour and a half. We're going to divide this into 3 writing sessions. We're going to take a 5-minute break to complain about our writing between. We're going to eat a muffin, but when we say go, we're going to go, and everybody's going to do heads down writing time. And I think that was also like super helpful. And that's not something they teach in MFA classes. They don't talk about like muffin allocation as part of a core creative strategy in MFA programs, much to their detriment, I think.
Yes.
But so I think just that first year where we were writing together, that group of probably 6 or so of us that were getting together in coffee shops around the Bay Area, we ended up crossing this finish line. And there definitely been some ups and downs, which we can talk about the ups and downs of National Novel Writing Month later. But I think that the thing that we came out of it with was a truly terrible first draft. I mean, it was awful. Everybody, even the most glorious winners, had a very bad draft, but the drafts were promising and the process had been enthralling. And I think that to me, it really reminded me a lot of a book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which I had read as a kid. And it really, this idea of there being this wardrobe in the book that's like this portal to another dimension.
Right.
I think to me, the act of spending focused creative time exploring these worlds that we all have in our imagination, to me was like stepping through that door. And I think as a 26-year-old, it made me realize like I have a book in me that I didn't realize was there, and I wonder what else is there. And that started a really different trajectory for my life and for a lot of my friends' lives too, where some of them never went back to that novel. Some of them decided never to write a novel again. But I think there's something about setting a really ambitious goal for yourself and just going all in and then achieving it that changes the way you see yourself. And so I think for me, I came out of that first National Novel Writing Month feeling like, if I and my friends can do this, anybody can do this, and everybody should be doing it. So I was like, we're going to bring it back again the next year. And that was kind of the first year.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It shifted how I thought about myself when I won. When I got to the end and I had my 50,000 words. It was brutal. We could talk about that, but it was also exhilarating. And my husband did it a couple of months, and I didn't make it to the after party that year, but he said it was the best party he'd ever been to because everybody there had just written a novel, and they were just like full of the like enthusiasm, excitement. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty powerful.
Well, I think,
So go
okay.
ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I do think there's something about adulthood, which like when we're kids, we have these fantasies about like what it means to be an adult, and which somehow is like unlimited candy, right? Like infinite amounts of time to do whatever you want. And adulthood is sadly the exact opposite of that, where we have so many obligations to so many different people, and we spend so much of our lives trying to do things for other people and making them happy. And I think especially if you have kids, that becomes a big part of it too. And so I think there's something really important for adults about having this time frame that is really just like for you, that this is a time when you're going to kind of, I think turn down those self-critical voices. As adults, we also are really scared of embarrassing ourselves in front of other adults, and just being willing to like risk it, to go for it, to try it. And then I think coming together with people at the end is like, it just feels great.
Yeah, definitely. So so the first year was 29 people, the second year was 140, and then you got some press, and the third year was 5,000 people. Like, how do you manage that?
Yeah, I didn't. Terribly is the answer. Yeah, it seems like it would be a great thing where it's like, 140 to 5,000 people. But I still didn't see this as like a legitimate undertaking. Like 100, the second year was still just friends of friends. I put together this website where in order to register for National Novel Writing Month, you would email me. I would like hand alphabetize your name on the HTML page. I would hand send you like a welcome invite. I would send you an invite to join the Yahoo Club that felt like was our forum. It was all mail. You sent me 3 times over the course of the month. You would send me your word count and I would put it on the website for you. That's how unsophisticated this endeavor was. And so when we hit 500 people even, I was like, I don't know how we can handle this. And so that group of friends from the first year, thankfully, several of them lived in my apartment building. We ended up running like Cat5 cables and connected our computers, and we did these like sign up all night, like kind of getting people signed up and sending out the invites. But yeah, it was a wild year. And I think that was the first year, we had to very quickly try to automate things. And one of the themes about National Novel Writing Month is really that, like, if you build it, they will come. And I really felt like people just showed up in the most wonderful ways. And that has been absolutely the case throughout National Novel Writing Month's life, that we had volunteers being like, I can code. I'm a developer. I can help with this website. And so we just ended up having so many people that really stepped up to start to make this event feel real. But yeah, we started having people in, places like South Africa getting together, and people in New York and Detroit and Austin, and forming these groups. And then now they were also getting together in coffee shops and libraries and living rooms and cheering each other on. And it was stunning. And I think that was when we finally survived that year 3, which was not pretty. And I think probably aged me by like several decades. I think that was the time when I was like, this is real. There's something about this that helps people do something that they wouldn't do otherwise, but it also is something that helps people connect with each other, to find like fellow book lovers or fellow people that are just up for creative adventures. And again, just to get back to adulthood, I'm really knocking on adulthood tonight. I don't mean to, but I do think it's easy to feel lonely, right? We kind of live these lives. A lot of us are in cities where it can be, as you get older, it can be hard to meet people. And there's something really nice about this kind of like low stakes fun event that gets people together. where you get to know some new people that maybe have similar interests. And so that was something that also I'd start to hear these stories about, Melbourne, Australia. Oh, we actually get together every Wednesday night for drinks year round. We're starting to do this. And so I think starting to hear these stories about like friendships forming, yeah, it was just really heartening. And that was also when, as the event grew, we started to hear these stories about people selling their manuscripts, which I had never dreamed. I was like, wait, sorry, you did what with your NaNoWriMo manuscript? You finished it and you sold it? And so that began the start of this other really interesting thing of people actually revising that book and publishing it. And then that also has become its own really interesting adventure, which I think we'll talk about a little later.
Yeah. So to level set what we're talking about here for people who don't know, the premise is that a standard novel is about 50,000 words. And so if you take 30 days, that means if you write 1,667 words a day for 30 days, you will end up with 50,000 words. So I loved that the book, like can you tell the story of how you decided that 50,000 words was because now it's like you would go Google what's the size of a novel, right? But no, not Chris.
Yeah, again, it will not surprise you. It was a very unscientific endeavor where I really looked on my bookshelf for like the shortest possible novel that was still a legitimate novel, which it turns out it was Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, which I grabbed. I didn't realize until later that I had this weird 1970s movie tie-in version that was like shorter than the actual one and had pictures in the middle of it of the movie set. Didn't matter. But anyway, yeah, 50,000 words is basically like the length of No Plot, No Problem is 50,000 words, which would be a very short novel. And in fact, like a lot of novels, when you publish them, like here's an example of, this is a published NaNoWriMo, a book that started as a NaNoWriMo manuscript. So this is Hugh Howey's Wool. I would say this is probably like 150,000 words. And so yeah. I think that novels tend to grow as you revise them. Some genres, though, tend to be shorter. So 50,000, 70,000 words can be it. But I think to me, 50,000 words felt like it was ambitious, but it was doable. I think trying to write 150,000 words would probably kill you.
Right.
Yeah. But even 50,000 words, I think is challenging. And you know this because you've done it. And I think what happens, there are these kind of approaches there that kind of help me get through it, and I think help other people, which is it's really taking this very right brain activity, which is fiction writing and imagining these worlds, and pairing it with this very left brain process of like quantifying it, breaking it down into little subsets. So I think writing a novel in a month, impossible. Writing 1,667 words a day, that's actually doable, especially when you start to think about that as like, it's not just one long session, because I think people have a lot going on. We're rarely going to have that luxury of being like, it's my 2-hour writing block. I shall now. So instead, you divide it up into 3 667 word sessions, and you do one in the morning, right when you wake up. Maybe you sneak one in on your lunch break. You get another one in at night. It's still going to be challenging. It's still easy to fall behind. But I think that idea of taking this very big, ambitious, amorphous, creative project and really pairing it with this like rigid calendaring, it really helps, I think, people stay on track. And again, it helps us kind of forget that we're doing this kind of terrifying thing, which is writing a novel. And instead, you're just trying to make your word count for the day, which I think, again, like helps quiet that inner critic who tends to want to look at this output and be like, this is bad, right? You shouldn't be doing this, right? This is the worst novel that's ever been written. So why don't you stop doing that? And instead, you're just like, did I write 667 words in that session? Yes, I'm a winner. Great.
Right. Yeah, you said in your book that a slow writer writes about 800 words a minute. And so writing 667 words translates to an hour and a half to 2 hours a day. And a fast writer can do that significantly faster, maybe half that time. But I would posit that a fast writer who has a plot in mind and knows exactly where they're going and do it in less time. Not be like, oh, well, now what?
Yeah. I know. Well, it's really interesting. So there are all these different communities within National Novel Writing Month, and one of them are kind of speed writers. And so
Mm.
their big thing is like they are going to write 1 million words in a month, and so they will write 50,000 words the first weekend. And I just like I don't even know physically like how you make your fingers do that, or like how you like my carpal tunnels would just like explode right there on the on.
Right.
I
Wow.
think I think that like this brings up this notion too of like success and what does it mean to win National Novel Writing Month? And so National Novel Writing Month is kind of this weird, it's a weird competition, right? Where the only thing you win is really a PDF of a winner certificate that you have to like download and write your own name on. Like that's the extent of the winnings. And every year there are tens of thousands of winners. And I think sometimes people when they hear about it they're like wait so you don't like get a book contract or an
Oh,
agent or any,
yes.
and I'm like, no. It's the worst set of prizes. But really, the joy is the biggest prize is the experience of doing it, and then kind of that potential filled manuscript that you get. But I hear from people sometimes where they say, "Oh, I tried NaNoWriMo once and I failed," and I'm like, "Oh, tell me about it." And they say, "Yeah, I only wrote 20,000 words and I just gave up." And I'm like, I just want to rewind what you said, which is that in a month you wrote 20,000 words of
Right.
fiction. I mean, that is more fiction than most people write in their lifetimes. And so I think the goal technically is 50,000 words for adults. For the kids, they can set their own word count goals when they're doing the Young Writers Program. But really the goal is just to help make some time for us to create amidst our like busy, hectic lives where I think we tend to be kind of focused on everything except for ourselves.
Right. Right. So you write in your book that writing starting the month without a plot is actually a good idea. And you told a story of like a friend of yours who like created this whole world and then she sat down to write and she was just blocked. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many counterintuitive lessons that I've learned about writing from National Novel Writing Month. And I do think, like, for me, that first year, starting without anything, without a setting, without characters, was incredibly liberating. And the
Mm.
book that emerged from that is one of the favorite NaNoWriMo novels that I've ever done. I did it for the first 20 years. Every year I would write a new book.
Wow.
And that was really one of my very favorite ones. And I think though that I wouldn't do that now. I think my approach now would be to like I probably a couple weeks before November I start to think about who these characters are and maybe what's missing from their life, what they want, maybe what they really need. Think about kind of opposing forces, and I kind of start to build out this world and start looking for inspiration around it. But I do think there's something nice about the idea that every year this thing rolls around that gives us a chance to experiment with our process. Because I think also as creative people, sometimes we can get a little stuck on kind of like, well, this is the kind of writer I am, or this is the kind of genre I write. And there's something nice about this idea that you get to mix it up. Every November, you're going to have a new chance to approach a book differently. Maybe if you tended to be a really rigid planner where you did outline, and you knew every beat of that story, maybe you could experiment a little bit with like letting that go. It may be a disaster, but that's fine. 30
Right.
days, there's always going to be another National Novel Writing Month coming around. I think
Right.
whatever your approach, I think to me, I have this sign that's up on my wall here in my office. And I think
Ah,
that whatever your approach is, I really feel like just making sure that you are letting it be imperfect, that you're giving yourself space for that first draft to suck really badly. And I think like
right.
that's a really hard thing for us to do, especially if we got into writing because we love reading, because we've read a ton of amazing books, which is
Right.
incredibly debilitating to our ability to create one. Because when we start to write, we immediately are like, this is not the thing that I had in my head. This is not the books that I read. But I feel
Yeah.
like I think a first draft of a novel is a really unique species. It's its own, I don't know if there's a lot of analogs in like other worlds where I think
Mm.
of something like pottery. And I think if you want to make a beautiful pot, you might do like a study of a pot, right? The first draft of your pot is probably kind of lumpy and maybe not totally well formed and falling over, or maybe the glaze isn't right, but it's still a pot. And I feel
Right.
like when it comes to novels, really that first draft is the clay. It's not
Yes.
it's not even a pot. And I think if
Right.
we go into it expecting clay, everything goes a lot better. And that's when like the magic starts happening. And
Exactly. I
yeah.
had a friend a couple of weeks ago. I've got a couple of essays published in Chicken Soup of the Soul, and she was talking about wanting to write stories about her family. And she was like, your writing is so lyrical. And when I write, it's not like that. I'm like, sweetie, when I wrote it, it wasn't like that. It's like those essays, I wrote them and then they went through 2 editing processes. They were workshopped with 4 other editors. They were professionally edited. They were run by my husband, who's a professional editor. And then the Chicken Soup of the Soul person made some more changes. So you cannot compare like a finished novel with what you're starting out with. And I think that's a huge, huge issue for people who think, oh, I want to write, or they're really good storytellers. But when they sit down to write, it just all blocks up. So yeah, that's being able to let go and just get a crappy first draft
Yeah.
down is glorious, actually.
Yeah, I think I really there's some great quotes about first drafts. There's a writer named Terry Pratchett who had a
Yeah.
quote that the first draft is just you telling yourself the story. And I love that.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's wonderful.
Yeah. And I think Anne Lamott, obviously a big
Yeah.
inspiration. She has the quote, the first draft is the down draft. I just get it down. The next draft is the up draft. I polish it up. And then there's this, we're not sure who said it, but there's this great quote. You can revise a terrible first draft into a great book, but you can't revise a blank page into anything but a blank page. And
Right.
that, I think, really captures the spirit of you have to get something down. And then I think our brains really, it's like, I think of book writing as like 2 very distinct processes. One is getting it down unencumbered. And the second is bringing in that team of polishers and
Yeah.
cleaners who are going to like make it so much better. And we're just good at that
Yeah.
as humans, right? Like one night you
There's
write something, in the morning, you can see this potential that you couldn't see before. And I think leaning into that and letting it be bad, knowing that your future self will be able to take on that task is important.
Yeah. Something that I carry with me, I went to a mystery writers conference after NaNoWriMo. I'm like, I need to learn some craft. And there was writer whose name is escaping me, but he has like 17 books on the New York Times bestseller list. And so he said, I sit down, I put on my hat, I put on my writer's hat, and I write and I write and I write. And I'm like, oh my God, this is the best novel ever. This is the best one in the series. This is great. And then I take off my writer hat and I put on my editor hat. And then I go back in and it's like, who wrote this? But I like that visual because it is very different parts of your brain that you're using when you create and when you edit, in
Yeah,
my experience.
I think that's really true. And they don't really teach that though. There is something I'm so curious about, just the like the way our brains work that allows that. I think this is true for writing. I think it's true for music. I think it's true for all creative art forms, that we somehow we can put something down and we go away and we come back with fresh eyes or fresh ears, and we
Yeah.
can see new opportunities and new potential in it that we somehow couldn't see before. And I don't know, why is that? Like, why can't our brain just get this novel right on the first draft, or get that pot beautiful
Right.
right on the get-go? But
No,
it
no, no.
can't.
That's
It
not
can't.
how it works.
Yeah. But there's
Well,
a
and
yeah, I was just going to say, I think too, that the other kind of lesson that I've learned from National Novel Writing, it's really, a book is often really born on the second draft or third draft or fourth draft or fifth draft. It can take a while for you to take this kind of like jumble of really beautiful, interesting ideas and find the heart of it. But I do think that really in order for you to be able to even look at it that way, you do need to have a beginning, a middle, and an end down on paper. And that, I think, is a lot of what National Novel Writing provides. It's just that idea of like trying to get this complete story out so you can come back in with that revision brain and make it good.
Well, and speaking of commonalities, the No Plot, No Problem was published a scant 5 years after you started NaNoWriMo. And it's a treasure trove of very practical information on how to get through. Here are the phases that you're going to go through. Here's week 1. Here's what you can expect. Here's week 3. Yeah, it's a slog. But, and I found it astonishing at how predictable the writing experience and the emotional trajectory was. And I just wanted to ask, were you surprised about the universality of the experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I think No Plot, No Problem came out of, it started as these emails that I would send out to National Novel Writing with participants. And I would start because I think that first year I really saw that there were times that it really felt like all hope was lost. And if I had quit, I wouldn't have gotten to this next phase, which was a moment when things started to come together in really surprising ways. And So I started sending out these emails at the start of each week that kind of told people, okay, listen, this is how we're feeling. I know that this is, you want to give up now. You're ready to bash your head into this computer. Don't do it. And really, it was just me telling myself things I needed to hear. And in some ways, No Plot, No Problem was really just a pep talk for myself. But I do think just noticing whenever you take on this big creative endeavor that is taking you outside of your normal life, where you're trying new things, I do think that there are these phases that are not unlike running a marathon or something, where at the beginning you have this elation of like, I'm doing this, they said I couldn't write a book and look at this. And the first chapters, it's really like you're just getting ideas down, and it doesn't matter if they don't really line up or if the characters don't make sense. And I think that moment of like just liberation and you're watching this book grow. And at the end of the day, you can look back and flip through these pages that didn't exist. And that's kind of intoxicating. But then I do think that there are these very predictable stages where around week 2 of National Novel Writing Month, you start feeling like, okay, but there needs to be a book here somewhere, right? Like these characters have to do something book-like. And so that's when you start, I think, being like, okay, but what do they do? And then it's like, well, maybe they get a divorce or have a road trip, or like what happens in movies. And that's when we start thinking about, these big these engines of story. And that can be tough and challenging. I think that's also, if you had a good beginning, you're starting to put pressure on yourself where you're like, well, I don't want to blow this great start that I had. And oh God, and now I'm needing to make these decisions where it feels like either they are going to get a divorce or that something big's going to happen. And that's going to take the book down one path. But what if I decide that's not the right path? And I think that that tends to be the point, unfortunately, which coincides with like, there's a lot of real life stuff that happens where our friends and family who are very interested in the novel for the first few days now never want to hear about it again. They're tired of the incessant novel talk. They're probably tired of you not doing the dishes or, trying to get out of other chores. And so I think this kind of like the muddy middle is a very common thought in like any big project. And I think that's where we tend to kind of get lost. But, there's this great there's a book by one of the Pixar co-founders called Creativity Inc. And I found it very heartening that he also talked about how every Pixar movie, as they try to write it, goes through this phase where they're like, this is not a good movie. This is really bad. And everything's kind of falling apart and all the potential is lost and we're never going to get out of it. But there's something magical about momentum. And I think that to me, like one of the real secrets of writing, one of the real secrets of doing a first draft is that when you have momentum, everything else falls into place. And I think that just committing to continuing to explore this world, to take it 500 words further and then another 500 words further. I think our brains are just good at kind of like taking these weird random bits that we kind of tossed up in the first half of the book and finding ways to start to braid them together into these really like interesting themes, motifs, ideas, plots, subplots. Like somehow it's just in there. And I think if we can just continue to work at it, those things kind of start to come together. So I find also that just this, when we think about kind of the ups and downs, there's really a big kind of down part. But then the last week of National Novel Writing Month, the physics of the whole thing shift. And I don't know if you found this, but like it was really uphill for a long time. And that last week, you were just sprinting effortlessly. The words are just flowing. I think because you kind of you've made a lot of those decisions, you've committed to a certain path, and it just feels so good. Like I just feels like confetti's falling on me. People are dumping Gatorade containers on whatever it is. Like it just feels pretty wonderful. But then I think the kind of curious thing is when it's over, I think in the same way that people who run marathons, when that ends, can feel a sense of kind of emptiness because you spent so long training for this thing and thinking about this thing, living with this thing, and then suddenly it's over and there's a lot more time in the day and you don't have this like interesting friend that you were on this kind of trip with. And I think that can be something that surprises people. That's also very common, which is there's kind of this post-novel sadness. And I think some people try to address it by like diving right into the rewrites. And I think my advice is like, don't do it.
Don't do that.
First off, your hands need a break. Your brain needs a break. You probably, need to go reconnect with loved ones, maybe get some vitamin D from actual sun for a little bit. But I think also, again, getting into that thought about like the power of fresh eyes, I think we need to give ourselves a break from this manuscript just so that we can come back and kind of see both like the potential, but also the problems that maybe we missed when we were so frantically close to it every day.
Yeah. It in my experience, it definitely needed a break, a breather. I needed a break. So Your support of adult authors is well known, and you kind of mentioned this, but something I didn't know until I participated in the Night of Writing Dangerously, which is an evening where we got together in San Francisco. There was this huge ballroom in this like oak paneled place, and we had dinner, and everybody was there to write. And there was this like enormous candy table that you could just go up and graze off of all night. And it was all of these writers. The energy was so wild. And you did a presentation that is bringing writing to kids, like creating modules, learning modules for teachers to teach kids. And you read some stories that kids had, or it talked about the plots of stories that kids, and it was amazing. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I think very early on, probably like around the fourth year or so, National Novel Writing Month wasn't a nonprofit yet. And so, but we were now having like $60,000 a month server bills, and we needed to raise money. And so one of the things that I thought might be interesting is to have some charitable giving component to it, to say, hey, listen, for once we meet our budget, every dollar, half of that afterwards is going to go to some cause. And so we started by partnering with this great organization called Room to Read, and they build libraries for children in Southeast Asia. And so we ended up over several years having this great relationship with Room to Read, where generous National Novel Writing participants donated to help like fund the endeavor, keep everything running. But we also were able to set aside money to build 12 libraries for kids in Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia. And I think that helped me start to feel like, this connection to kids and reading and writing, and how can we foster that? And at the same time, we were starting to hear from teachers, and the teachers were saying, hey, listen, do you have any advice on bringing this into the classroom? And so we were like, this does not seem like a kid-friendly activity, this idea of like bashing out a 50,000 word novel, but it sounds like there's some usefulness here. And so we kind of started to put the teachers in touch with each other to kind of brainstorm lesson plans and things like that. But then we kind of realized that it would be helpful. These teachers are, very few schools are just like, go wild, teacher, whatever you want to do. If you want to have kids write a novel for a month, that's fine. They need to have it kind of aligned to whatever curriculum or standards there are in their districts. And so we started working, and this was Tavia Stewart was our very first hire, and she was amazing at this, of creating these downloadable workbooks for kids, lesson plans for teachers that were all mapped to Common Core language standards. And so teachers could make this very clear argument that, hey, listen, when we work on writing with your 5 senses for your novel, we are hitting this standard, and this standard. We also would send a big progress chart. We would mail a progress chart with buttons that said novelist for kids, and then stickers that the kids could put on their chart. And we quickly discovered, one, that kids will do anything for a sticker, including write a novel in a month. So, and two, that there was something about that kind of, again, that challenge that kind of made it a game where they would, a 4th and 5th grade class would compete for word count. And they just got so into it. And we would start to get these like kind of awestruck reports back from teachers saying, kids are staying in from recess to write their novels in November. And we've never seen anything like this. And I think that I would go and visit these schools, and they would be having their own write-ins, the kind of Night of Writing Dangerously, where they would come to the school in the evening and they'd all work on their books and share their stories. And I don't know, it's just really like that. It became clear that to me, like that was like our new like charitable mission. So we since then have spent a lot of this kind of, as we raise money, we are funding this. I think 10,000 schools, 10,000 classrooms around the world are now doing National Novel Writing Month in some form. The Young Writers Program is still going strong, and I meet a ton of people. So it's now happening at both like the elementary, the middle, and the high school level. It's also happening at the college level. So Stanford teaches a National Novel Writing Month course every year. I go down and talk with those students, and it's amazing because a lot of the students that are showing up in this class, they're working on their 6th novel because they started in National Novel Writing Month as like a 6th grader. There was this one amazing story where there was a girl who had signed up for National Novel Writing Month, and her parents were so concerned that it was going to tank her high school career, that she was going to get so distracted by the novel that she wouldn't study, that they forbade her from working on her NaNoWriMo novel. And so she ended up doing it secretly, where she would have like study sessions where friends would come over and they would study, but she would work on her novel. And eventually her dad found out, and there was this big drama where he then erased her hard drive as like because she had defied him about novel writing. But then she got the last laugh because I met her in the Stanford National Novel Writing Month course, and she was still doing NaNoWriMo. It's really amazing. But yeah, I think just in the same way that kind of that sense of like Narnia and these doors that open to us when we tackle these big adventures, I think for a kid, a fourth or a fifth grader, who a lot of them say, if you asked them, they would say, I hate writing. Writing is really hard. It's my least favorite thing. I don't want to do it. But when you somehow make it this adventure where they're setting this ambitious goal, they're kind of competing against their friends, and they kind of start to fall in love with it. And I think once you have written your first novel as a fifth grader, that changes everything about your relationship to books and writing and reading. And for the rest of your life, you see writing as something that you can do because you did it. I mean, most adults have not written a book. You wrote a book. And I think that feels fantastic, but it also is something that I think sticks with them as they go through the rest of their lives.
Oh my God, absolutely. It's like, I wish I could have done that when I was in fifth
I know,
grade.
me too. Me
Like,
too.
wow, that is like so cool. So we have a few questions, so we'll get to those in a minute. And if you have a question for Chris, please drop it into the chat. But before we go, what are some of we showed us one, but what are some of the other well-known books that got their start at NaNoWriMo?
Yeah. And again, like this is really, so these are the like traditionally published books, and there are tens of thousands of amazing self-published books that are out there. And then a lot of times, it's like some of the best books are ones that are still just on people's hard drives that hopefully their fathers have not erased in a fit of pique. But but these are ones where people really spent a lot of time and went the kind of more traditional publishing route. So I think some of the big ones I held up this, and Hugh actually self-published this first, and then it was picked up. Another kind of well-known one is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This is a pretty beloved book. Here's some kind of more recent ones. Jasmine Guillory is a great writer. I think maybe Bay Area writer. XR Pan, this is a great book. Cinder, so this is a part of a series. Really, really great. And Marissa's been like a very generous backer of National Novel Writing Month as well. I'm just going to do two more, I promise. So Rainbow Rowell is one of my favorite writers. So great. This is one by her. And then the very first kind of like big, like National Novel Writing Month manuscript is Water for Elephants by Sarah Gruen. So this was the first one that was turned into like a major Hollywood movie. And I remember just like going to the movies and just being like, this is Robert Pattinson somehow is like in my universe now because he's starring as a vampire in this National Novel Writing Month thing. But Sarah Gruen has also been an incredibly generous supporter of National Novel Writing Month. And that's been one of the kind of great things is I think the community has really changed a lot, where at the beginning it was just a lot of over-caffeinated yahoos like me who just were kind of falling in love with this thing, not really knowing what we're doing. And then I think that kind of grew into this great community of amateur writers, but then professional writers also started discovering it and being like, I'm under a book contract and I'm terrified that I'm not going to get this book done. This seems amazing. Like, so in a month I can write 50,000 words. And so I think that National Novel Writing with Community has become this really interesting thing where we have a mix of, first-time novelists and people that have written and published a dozen books, but that spirit of kind of helping each other out and giving tips and advice and cheering each other on is something that kind of stretches through all of it. It's a really unique, I think writing communities sometimes can get really fixated on like critique, or kind of, I don't know, I think sometimes writing communities can get a bad rap as, I don't know, just being snooty, or there's something but there's something kind of beautiful about National Novel Writing Month where it embraces all different kinds of people, all different genres, and we're all just kind of here with the same purpose, which is to kind of have fun making things for a month.
Yeah. Oh, wow. This is like so exhilarating. And actually, one of the comments, Sonia says, is a 12-time NaNoWriMo. I am used to saying inspiring things about writing to fellow writers, but hearing Chris talk about it took me back to the fundamentals and re-inspired me.
Sonia. So
yeah.
Sonia is a legend in the NaNoWriMo world. Sonia, in fact, is in No Problem, contributed advice to it. Hi, Sonia. Thank you. It's good to see you.
So Karen asks, what is your most astonishing experience with NaNoWriMo?
the most astonishing. Oh my gosh, I've had so many interesting moments. I think one was the moment when I realized that we had National Novel Writing Month participants on all 7 continents. That was kind of
Oh,
interesting.
wow.
Um,
Antarctica.
yeah, it was really fascinating,
Wow.
fascinating. Yep. That was really big. Yeah, I mean, I think to me, it's just traveling around and hearing people's stories. And again, some of them are about books, but some of them are just about how this event, I think, just kind of helped them have more confidence in themselves. And I think help them discover that, like, whatever they saw themselves as, that they really are and have so much more than that. We all do. And
Right.
so that I think that that's been great. It is really fun to travel around to libraries and see National Novel Writing Month books on the shelves. Like that is an absolutely astonishing, still to me, wonderful thing. I think other things that are really great. I sometimes will get emails that include a photo of a kid in them, and I'm like, "What
Mm.
is this?" And it's people that met at a National Novel Writing Month event that then ended up getting married and having a kid together. Like that's kind of wild that there's like, I mean, there's like hundreds of NaNoWriMo babies that a lot of whom are now like heading off to college, maybe doing their own
Uh,
missions. So I think just when I think to answer what somebody else had kind of asked, like, what happened? Why aren't you running National Novel Writing Month anymore? And I think to me, after I had run it for about 13 years, I just wanted to get back to the writing again. I think
mm.
the organization had grown to the point that we had $1 million a year budget that I was fundraising for, where we had,
Oh,
writers, 300,000 writers and chapters in hundreds of cities and towns around the world. And just the organization of it, we had 2 full-time developers, we had a staff of 8. There was just, it was a lot. And I think I wanted to get back to that spirit of writing, getting back into these smaller rooms. And so I ended up, one of the nice things about a nonprofit structure, which, the Friends of the Alameda Free Library is a nonprofit, this, is that it has this built-in longevity where when the executive director is ready to move on, that you just kind of pass the baton and the staff steps up and the board steps up and there's a new person in charge, but it just keeps going. And that, I think, to me, has also just been one of the like truly great things about this is
mm.
just, even though it's been like 12 years now since I was like actively daily involved in the day-to-day life, it's just still doing wonderfully. And I feel like I think an organization needs kind of to have these new thoughts and new voices that kind of can come in and help take it on to the next generation. And it's just been so satisfying to me to see like National Novel Writing Month just continue to blossom.
Absolutely. Beth asks, you mentioned that there is no one good way to write. Are there any bad ways to avoid?
I don't think so. I don't, as long as you're writing, I mean, I think it's like I think of this as writing is just such an experiment. It's always an experiment. And I think as long as you're trying and learning from it, I don't think there are bad ways to write. I don't know, TC, what do you think? Are there bad ways to write?
I don't think there are bad ways to write. I've got in my notes, in the writing world, there's basically 2 camps. There's the plotters and the pantsers. And so you have people like Anne Perry who will do detailed outlines of a novel and then just sit down and write it. And then you have people like Diana Gabaldon, who's just like, oh, I have a picture and there's a cut glass uh, tumbler with the thistle theme and the sunlight is coming in. So that must mean I'm in this room with these people. And then she writes a scene out of that.
Yeah.
And those are called pantsters, like writing by the seat of your pants. And those are both completely valid, and some people do a mix of them. And I myself am in the Diana Gabaldon camp. Um, so I don't think there's any wrong way to do it, and we are a society that has been taught that we need rules around things. And so I think a lot of NaNoWriMo for me was releasing a lot of that. And I think that's what the insane deadline does. But also another class at the Mystery Writers Conference about plot, and she said it's just what happens next. What happens next? What happens next? And someone is like, what happens when you get stuck? And she's like, you're making it all up.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that was just so freeing. It's like, I'm so used to, I cook, so there's a recipe and you have to follow the recipe, right? No, you can make up anything. And if you're in a fantasy novel, you can really make up anything, right? And
Yeah.
that's the freeing part of it. And so getting the first draft down, just like you said, if you're writing, you're doing it right.
Yeah, and I think too,
So
it's kind of like the more you practice it, the more you find kind of your voice and what you love. And I think for me, after that first one, which was very light and humorous, I was like, now I will write the deathless literary masterwork that is brewing underneath. And it was terrible, terrible, terrible. Just nothing redeeming about that second NaNoWriMo
right.
effort. And I think that kind of taught me like I just do love, I love lightness and I love humor and absurdity. And so I think my favorite NaNoWriMo novels kind of come back to that. But I also think it's embracing this idea that everybody writes, has different strengths as a writer. So for me, I read certain books where people have these exquisitely detailed descriptions of what's going on, the way, like you mentioned, the way the light is falling on a scarf or something, or a
Right.
landscape. I cannot describe things for the life of me. Like if my character is like, it's basically like my main character, all I know is that like he has dark hair. Literally, it's like I've no, if somebody was like, well, who would you cast in a movie? I'm like, I don't know. I can't see this person at all. But I still feel really connected to him. And I think it's okay to just embrace that idea that I love dialogue. I love kind of scenes that move quickly, that have very little description, that feel a little more like a screenplay. And if that's what you love reading, that's what you should write. It's okay.
Exactly. Right. Go with what you love.
Yeah.
So Karen asks, how do people win on the local, who are the local winners, national, international, who judges? And this is part of the joy of it is nobody is judging the work. Like you go to the website, you upload your novel, it counts the words. If you've hit 50,000, you win. And you can download a certificate and you can buy a t-shirt. And I have my t-shirt safely hidden away. I was going to bring it out for tonight, but and that's, so it's a competition, but it's a competition against yourself. And I think that's I love the community part of it because as you said, writers are very solitary creatures in general. And so, it's like I'm not competing against you. I'm competing against myself in the word count. And I'm cheering for you to beat your word count. It's like we're all urging each other on. So, that cutthroat competition, somebody wins and somebody doesn't. There's no non-winners who complete the 50,000 word count.
Yeah.
And I love that about it.
Yeah, that's always been kind of this fun thing is kind of trying to figure out how to, I don't know, how to have a finish line for this competition. And so I think the word counting was always interesting where, in my time, by the end, you just basically put it paste it into a browser window. We wanted to make sure nobody worried that we were going to steal their novel. So it would just kind of stay up. We wouldn't download it. It just would kind of get counted out there on the server. But there's still this real moment of drama when you do it, where it's just a computer algorithm that's counting the thing, but there's
Right.
this pause, and then you're just like, oh God, oh God. And then you see the congratulations screen, and there's a video, and you're just like, ah. I remember I was in a coffee shop once in Oakland, and I was peering over the shoulder, and I watched a woman as she was uploading her National Novel Writing Month novel, and I just watched her
Oh,
go through that feeling of watching it, that pause, and then the celebration and her smile, and it was so cool. And yeah, even though there are no real prizes, it still feels like you've won
oh,
something.
absolutely. Well, our time is drawing to a close. So many thanks to you for a really fun conversation.
Yeah.
And note that there is a link in the chat, which will take you to directly to the Books Inc. page where you can purchase this fun guide for yourself. And if you want to join the writing fun, I will be hosting a weekly write-in on Saturdays from 1 to 3 in the family study room at the main library on Oak Street, starting on November 4th. So again, thank you.
This was so great. TC, I know we have a lot of international visitors on the call. Do you think the Friends of the Alameda Free Library could commit to flying in a variety of international guests for these write-ins. Just like it doesn't need to be first class. I'm thinking just come on, we all need to write together, right? We've spent this evening together. Let's bring them in. What do you think? Yes? Okay, I'm hearing a yes here.
That's above my pay grade.
Okay, well, I'll
I
be there.
love the idea though. That would be like awesome. Like anybody can show up. It would be so fun to have as many people as possible.
Okay, all right. So come to the Alameda Free Library. If you need to get on a plane, you may have to pay for it yourself, but everybody is welcome.
Yeah.
And yeah, this has been a real treat. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. And a reminder to consider a donation to the Friends of the Alameda Free Library at alamedafriends.com or through the link posted in the chat. It will help us continue to produce events like this one. Also, if you have a friend who missed it, you can tell them it will be available on YouTube in the next few days. They can also check the alamedafriends.com website for a link. Our next Friends event is the famous Fall Book Sale. This event is held at the main library tomorrow and Friday from 10 to 5 and Saturday from 10 to 4. Come by, grab a huge variety of books at bargain prices. Christmas is just around the corner, so get your shopping done early and support your library at the same time. Our next Friends at Home author event, will be author Philip Schott, the author of the Dr. Bannerman Mysteries. Will be talking about his first book in this series, 54 Pigs and 6 Ostriches, which is about Peter Bannerman and his dog Pippin, who find themselves in situations that test their sleuthing skills and lead them into many adventures. So join us on Wednesday, November 8th for this fun talk. I would like to thank the team that makes these events happen: Karen Manuel, Karen Romer, Renisha Robertson, Kumar Font, Karen Butter, Catherine Adcox, Billy Reisenschmidt, and Becky Sear. And a special thanks again to Chris Baty for an informative and entertaining program. And finally, thanks to you for joining us this evening. Good night.